Thank you for joining us. Today, Video Fit Solutions is going to review a movie called The Island, which stars one of my favorite actors, Michael Jai White, and his wife, Gillian White. When LAPD officer Mark's brother is killed, Mark leaves the city to return to the island where he grew up on. Seeking answers and vengeance, he soon finds himself in a bloody battle with a corrupt tycoon who's taken over the island paradise. Let's review one of Michael Jai White's newest movies, called The Island, which was released in 2023. Please like, share, and subscribe to Where in the World is Frank and Gina on YouTube. The movie starts off with a lead singer named Nora, whose band is singing at the Island Cafe owned by Alvarez, who notices her and offers her a one-year contract, tripling her pay. Flattered by his offer, Nora accepts readily, and she also accepts a glass of wine from the bartender. As he pours it, he accidentally spills some on her dress. However, she readily says she's okay. However, Alvarez is very angry. He has other guests there and doesn't want to see her with a stained dress, and he kills the bartender right in front of her. At this moment, she knows that Alvarez is a dangerous man. What she doesn't know is that Alvarez is not just the owner of the cafe, he's also the leader of a dangerous mafia. Alvarez has been on the island for 4 years running his operation. The mood then switches to Los Angeles, where you see Police Chief Mark and his partner, Phil, who are both undercover, posing as criminals trying to strike a deal with other criminals who arrive. Mark then prepares to give the goods to the leader of the criminals, while his partner plans to hand over the money. However, things take an unexpected turn. He decides to turn the tables and launch an attack. Mark's friend, the dealer, then stirs up trouble and starts a brawl. Just then, Mark's mother calls and delivers devastating news. His brother has been killed. Upon hearing the devastating news, Mark rushes back to his hometown to attend his brother's funeral. Mark soon learns that his brother was the bartender killed by Alvarez. While Mark's mother is devastated by the death of her son, whispers begin to circulate about the mobster's involvement. Mark's brother was returning home when the incident occurred. Even Alvarez and his cohorts are under suspicion. As the funeral procession proceeds, you see Aquila, Mark's ex-girlfriend, showing support. The scene then switches to Mark coming home from the funeral with his mother, reminiscing about his brother in old times. Mark then realizes it's been 11 years since he's been there. His responsibilities as a police chief has kept him away. Mark then makes a vow to his mother to avenge his brother's death. The next day, he heads to the police station to meet with the police chief, whose name is B, his childhood friend. They share a deep bond, and B offers his condolences for the loss of his younger brother. The police chief also tells Mark that he would launch a full investigation, while Mark asks about the identity of the suspects. The police chief informs him that it's rumored to be gangsters, but due to the number of gangsters on the island, it's going to take some time to investigate. During his visit, Mark sees Aquila, a martial arts instructor, and also his ex-girlfriend, who seems visibly happy to see him after an 11-year absence. During their conversation, Aquila gives her condolences for the loss of his brother. Mark asks her, did his brother have any involvement with organized crime? Aquila also goes on to tell Mark that even though she lost track of the gangs on the island since he left, she did know that his brother had hooked up with an American named Alvarez. She goes on to say that Alvarez is not what he seems. On the surface, he seems like a businessman, but under the surface, he's actually using the island to hide his weapons and illegal businesses. As Mark's suspicion grows towards Alvarez, he tells Aquila he needs to confront him, and then asks her to look out for his mother as he goes out to confront Alvarez. Mark then goes to Alvarez's cafe. He's confronted by Alvarez's henchman, who attempts to block his way, but then Alvarez waves him through. Mark then confronts Alvarez about his brother's death. Alvarez in return concocts a story that his brother was killed after a late-night shift. Mark doesn't buy it. He warns Alvarez that he would never forgive him if he finds out he had anything to do with his brother's death. Alvarez shrugs it off. Alvarez then warns Mark that he's just a regular cop, but he does give him a lead to where other gangsters are hanging out. It's Mark to go check it out. As Mark leaves, he orders his right-hand man to have gang members take care of Mark later that night. Later that evening, Mark runs across his best friend who has a hot dog stand. He inquires about some weapons that he had stashed. He told him that they were in an abandoned building on the other side of the island. As their conversation continues, you learn that Mark and his friend had a close bond until Mark moved to Los Angeles. The friend went on to tell Mark that the island had become a cesspool for mafia and for other gangs. Sensing his friend's determination, he vows his allegiance. Later that evening, Mark finds the cache of weapons on the island. Mark then heads to the cafe suggested by Alvarez, stops the music as the gangsters are playing. They didn't take too kindly to this, and a fight starts. As tensions begin, Mark skillfully disables one of the henchmen, and then demands again for them to tell him who murdered his brother. As the gang leader begs Mark and tells him he had nothing to do with it, Alvarez has sent other henchmen to take care of Mark, and they start firing upon the establishment. As Mark narrowly escapes, the henchmen pursue him. However, he manages to disable one of them, finding a hiding spot until they all dispersed later. Infuriated that his gang didn't catch Mark, he now orders them to harm Mark's mother. Later, you see the bandits entering Mark's mother's home and then firing upon what they think is her bed until they find out it's an empty pillow. You see, Akila has sensed that Mark's mother was in danger and took her to safety. Later, you see Mark meeting back up with the police chief, who's investigating the crime at Mark's home. Mark is furious and tells him that had Akila not taken care of his mother, she would have been here when those gangsters came. The chief tells him he has additional information on the case. He tells him that a girl named Nora actually witnessed it. She's now staying in a hotel in room number 18. The next day, we see Mark going to Nora's room and knock on it. She's hesitant at first, thinking he has something to do with Alvarez, but then opens as Mark flashes his police badge. Once inside, they have a conversation. Mark then tells her he'll help her leave the island, but he needs to know the identity of the person that killed the bartender. Eventually, Nora tells him that Alvarez had done it over him spilling a glass of wine on her dress. She goes on to say that she's stuck on the island. However, upon learning this news, Mark takes swift action. Later, you see Mark walking with Nora and they meet up with B. He asks him to get her safely to the pier while he goes back. Mark then sees Akila and his mother and tells them. Later, the narrative switches to Alvarez, who's livid about Mark. He tells his associates to hire some mercenaries to take care of Mark. The mercenaries arrive at his home, while Mark is still standing there with Akila and his mother on the porch. Mark consoles them, but has a plan. In the meantime, two of the mercenaries enter Mark's house while two wait outside. The two see evidence that Mark has left. As they run out the back following his trail, gunfire is exchanged between the three. Back outside in the front, B encounters the two other mercenaries, and gunfire is exchanged between them. B manages to run them off while Mark tries to disable one of the other mercenaries. Meanwhile, B contacts Mark to find out where he's at. He says that he's with Akila and his mother and they're safe in a friend's house who happens to sell hot dogs. The scene switches to Alvarez and his cohorts, who are beginning to look for Nora. Alvarez is outraged that she's not there, and then takes down the guard for not protecting her. The scene then switches to Mark, who arrives with Akila and his mother at his friend's house and leaves them there. Mark's unwavering desire to avenge his brother's death strikes his friend and Akila. It's noticed by both Akila and his best friend. However, as Mark tries to leave, Akila insists on joining him. He tries to dissuade her, to no avail, leading them to decide to confront the challenge together. As Mark and Akila await for B to arrive that night to confront Alvarez, they see his car arrive. However, he doesn't get out. As Mark approaches, he realizes B has been severely injured, and it's an ambush, and gunfire erupts. As the three mercenaries engage Mark, they manage to capture Akila. While Mark doesn't notice, he attempts to help his friend B, who's dying. He encourages him to continue the fight against injustice and Alvarez and his henchmen. Then he dies. The following day, we see a church and parishioners attending services. Mark arrives and convinces everyone to join together to fight against Alvarez. He tells them it's the only way. They have to band together. Mark reminds them that this time it's not just his brother, it's also the police chief B and his girlfriend Akila. The new information unites everyone and they all agree to unite. Later, Mark returns to the police station and temporarily fills in as the chief. He then attempts to unite the police chief's men and let them know the seriousness of Alvarez's actions. Just then, he's distracted by Phil, his Los Angeles partner, who's been concerned about Mark's absence from the police force in Los Angeles. Mark then explains to Phil that he is not leaving until he finds Aquila and takes care of the killer of his brother. Phil agrees to join him and assures Mark that he has his back. Later that evening, Alvarez, figuring out that Mark had something to do with the disappearance of Nora, calls him. Alvarez makes a proposition, Nora for Aquila, on the condition that Mark puts everything behind him. He agrees to leave him alone. As Mark contemplates the suggestion, he knows that Nora has already left the island, which won't be a good deal. He also knows that true forgiveness won't come until he exacts his revenge on Alvarez. Mark also knows that Nora has left, so he has to assemble a team of the police officers to try and get help. He also appoints Phil as the leader of the commando team. As their 7 a.m. appointment with Alvarez approaches, Phil agrees to follow Mark's lead. On the day of the meeting, Mark attempts to meet with Alvarez while Phil and the team attempts to rescue Aquila. After Phil and the team confront the mercenaries for Alvarez, he eliminates one. Once Mark reaches Alvarez, he wastes no time asking about Nora. Mark tells him that Nora will arrive, however, he's just waiting for Phil to update him on the rescue attempt for Aquila. Shortly thereafter, Phil locates Aquila, however, it's a trap, and one of the mercenaries pulls a gun on him. Phil decides to surrender, however, one of his partners helps eliminate the threat. As Phil lets Mark know that Aquila is safe, Mark then turns his attention back to Alvarez. Alvarez threatens Aquila after Mark tells him that Rosa has left. He also informs Alvarez that his henchmen are no longer a threat to Aquila. Alvarez then orders his henchmen to shoot Mark. However, Mark skillfully disarms him. And as things seem to take a bad turn for Mark, the hot dog stand owner and some of the island's residents assist him. However, Mark orders them to lower their weapons. He challenges Alvarez to a duel. Alvarez reluctantly accepts it, and then Mark annihilates him in the same manner as he did his brother. Later that evening, as Mark and Aquila are enjoying the beach, Phil arrives and asks Mark to come back to Los Angeles. However, Mark declines and states that he wants to stay on the island to keep it safe from other gangsters and mobsters such as Alvarez. The scene then switches back to Mark and Aquila enjoying the beach and each other. We thank you for watching our video. Hope you enjoyed our review of The Island, the 2023 movie starring Michael Jai White and his wife, Gillian White. Please like, share, and subscribe to Where in the World is Frank and Gina on YouTube. And also, please check out some of Michael Jai White's other movies. And please follow him and his wife on social media. You can also just type in Frank and Gina to get to our channel. God bless.